Okay, to continue our great discussion today, next we have our panel Getting Real in Our New Reality, presented by Berdia Chambers, Megan Pitts, Marisol Ramirez, and moderated by Shelley Smith. Take it away.
First, I want to note that Berdia Chambers was unable to be with us today. She had an emergency, and so Megan and Marisol are our panelists for today. And I want to first allow them to introduce themselves to you. So, Megan, you want to start?
Sure. I don't see, okay, this is on, good. Good morning, everyone. It is still morning, yes? Okay.
Yes.
It's been a long day already. Megan Pitts, right. Currently work for Bristol Myers Squibb out of Princeton. I have been with them for the past 10 months. Most of my career has been in the pharmaceutical industry. Prior to my current role, I was at Johnson & Johnson for 13 years. And prior to that, spent about 5 years in the financial services industry with JP Morgan. I have spent the majority of my career on the commercial side of companies. So, you know, kind of the money-making engines. Grew up kind of in brand marketing roles, corporate marketing, selling things like Listerine and Johnson's Baby, you know, to Target and Walmart. And always have touched kind of the space of DEI, from multicultural marketing, cause marketing, purpose marketing. I've always kind of found my way through the marketing and commercial side into the space of DEI. But last year really kind of made jump the fence from the commercial side over to a full-time role in DEI, which sits within our HR organization at Bristol Myers. And my role there is really leading all of our external engagements. So all of the NGO, nonprofit partners we work with on kind of the shared mission that we have around DEI. And then also leading some of our capabilities building within the organization to ensure that DEI is living throughout the full business model, not just sitting in HR.
Thank you, Megan. Marisol?
Good morning, everyone. Marisol Ramirez. I am with PSEG. I am their Supplier Diversity Manager. I've been in the role officially 4 years next Friday. I've been with the company 9 years next Friday, but in my role for 4 years. Prior to that, I've been in accountings for my entire career. However, being a Puerto Rican woman, have always been a big advocate of DEI. So about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I did learn about supplier diversity, which spoke to my passion and existence as part of procurement, and I made the switch in careers to supplier diversity. In addition to that, I am the president of one of PSEG's oldest and longest employee business resource groups, Adelante, which is the Hispanic Latinx EBRG. I am a member of pretty much all 12 EBRGs, because I believe all of them can either allow you to learn something and allow you to bring something to the table. But I am very active across the state in DEI initiatives as well.
Thank you, Marisol. And I'm Shelley Smith. I am a partner at Archer & Greiner, a South Jersey law firm that is the largest law firm in South Jersey. I'm a partner in the business, litigation, and the labor and employment groups, and I'm also the firm's chief of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm pleased to be here today to moderate this panel. We have had such great discussions preparing for this panel. We just had a really excellent conversation over there. I wish we could have videotaped it for you, and then we wouldn't have to do this. But we'll see. But we'll see how we can replicate it for you in person. So, as you know, our topic is finding stability in the continued shifting sands of the DEI space. So to get into that, I think I want to start by asking you two, when you first started working in your respective organizations early on in your careers, what was DEI like then? What did it look like? And was it even DEI at that time? Megan, you want to start?
Yeah, when I go back about 20 years ago, actually, just when I was starting in the financial services industry, I think it was not DEI. I think it was just diversity, and mostly centered around representation. So just ensuring that we are hiring people from different ethnic, gender, et cetera, backgrounds. And that was kind of the extent of it, I think, about 20 years ago.
How about you, Marisol?
So as I look back over my career, prior to PSEG, diversity was never a conversation or something that was talked about on the company level. It wasn't until I started 9 years ago in PSEG that I got introduced to employee resource groups and to diversity and inclusion councils, which I participated in since early on, and then it evolved into diversity, equity, and inclusion to date, and a more robust DEI culture within our company.
And how did it evolve? What changed? Like what did those ERGs do for the organization that caused it to evolve to the point where it is?
So coming in as someone new, the employee resource groups, when I came in, were really of an ability to connect with other employees. So for example, I got to meet a lot of the Hispanic Latinx employees in the company who were in various lines of business, who were there as a resource to allow me to feel like I belonged in the company. And there's always been a culture of DEI at PSEG. One of my favorite things to do since I started with the company was our annual signing of our DE&I commitment pledge. And it was a very public signing. It was a big banner on the second floor. We got to sign, and it was just a commitment to be able to, recommit to our core values, because it is a part of our core values. And it's always been at the forefront of my existence at PSEG. Over time, our employee resource groups transition to employee business resource groups so that we can make an impact on the business, right? But in addition to that, on an enterprise level, our D&I councils were now somewhat, and I'm going to say restructured. So we went from a D&I council model to a local inclusion team model. And what that did is that each line of business had their own local inclusion team, and I got the opportunity to lead procurements. And the reason I like that model is because the concerns that procurement may be facing with diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging may not be the same that our gas engineers may be facing. So it allowed us to truly, with a team of our own employees, really address those concerns that were important to us that came out of our employee engagement survey. So in partnership with our senior leadership team, we were really able to identify what the concerns were for our organization and truly work towards providing solutions for those issues. And what that also did for us as a company is we had a direct partnership with the Office of DEI. So I sometimes joke around with my counterpart there that I say I part-time work in their office because I'm very involved with DEI initiatives across the company. And from being a local inclusion lead, I transitioned into now our employee business resource groups are an enterprise model, which really restructured how we participated as employee business resource groups. I could only speak for Adelante, but we used to think we were enterprise, but although we were really focused in our Newark General office, we didn't really have outreach to our other locations. Now, as an employee business resource group on an enterprise level, our team, our board of 14 dynamic, phenomenal individuals are all parts of different lines of the business across the enterprise. We have union representation. We have our regular employees, and we do not get paid for this. This is volunteer work. And the reason I believe in not paying anyone for this type of work is because it allows you to identify those individuals within a company that you can build as leaders. And the reward is going to come from recognition in the accomplishments that you made as an EBRG, and it's going to come in opportunities for advancement within the company. So it's a very, DEI is a very important part of our culture. It's embedded in our culture. And these small things are what allows us to, make it sustainable for years to come.
How has DEI changed in the course of your career?
Yeah, I think, again, at the beginning, it was hiring, right? Just diverse individuals. I think that progressed to what I call talent and training. So developing those diverse individuals that you bring to the organization and then training the company. I'm sure many of you have probably taken, our trainings that tells you not to say bad things to your coworkers.
Or dumb things.
Or dumb things, as we jokingly said, and there's not a lot of research to say, is that really effective, right? Just to be, kind of candid. And so I think a lot of DEI for, before I would say the past kind of 5 years was focused on training. And typically that training was like an hour webinar, right, at your desk or what have you. Now, I think April 2020 is kind of what we now call the diversity tipping point after the murder of George Floyd, as we all know. And I think a part of what really happened is, one, understanding how DEI really affects the full life cycle of your business operations, right? It's not just talent and training, but when that talent and training is not effective, what it's actually doing to you and your business. I think that's now been the conversation that is at the forefront, and how we leverage DEI to really fulfill the business strategy. So to me, that's a 180 from just talking about hiring diverse individuals to we actually can't fulfill innovation in the most optimal way if we really don't actually start to really get serious about DEI. And so what happens then is the prioritization of DEI has gone up and the investment. And we all know if it don't make money, it don't make sense, right? So where the dollars are just very telling on kind of where the priority of the company is when it comes to DEI. For Bristol Myers, one of the reasons I was actually very intrigued to come work for the company is that in 2017, so our employee resource groups that we call PBRGs, People and Business Resource Groups, to make sure that we're connecting to the business, we have 8 of those. They are full-time jobs. So typically in companies, these are not full-time jobs. You have a full-time job, like when I was a marketer, I had my full-time job, and then I ran the African American Network as my side job or my evening, right? And I was very impressed to see that Bristol Myers, to talk about and get investment in the prioritization of the work of DEI, that our 8 PBRGs are full-time roles. So that is 100% of what those leaders focus on, and they all report to a person on our LT, which is the leadership team directly that goes into our CEO. So we are really trying to ensure, to Marisol's point, that the work is embedded throughout the full kind of cycle of business operations across the company, both creating the culture of belonging and taking care of your people, but also really identifying innovation and all the different business, kind of opportunities we have to really embed DEI throughout everything that we're doing.
So how have you, either one of you, how have you seen the work of these ERGs really impact the operations of your organizations? Megan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll give one example. Our DAWN PBRG, which is our Persons with Disabilities Network, they have been working with our clinical trials operations team. So we have a diversity and clinical trials effort. And they actually just got the first piece of legislation passed to change some of the way that we screen individuals for clinical trials to ensure that we are giving equitable opportunities for persons with disabilities to be included in the trials. Critically important, because if you do have certain disabilities, your interactions with certain therapies, medicines, et cetera, may be vastly different than someone who does not have that disability. But if you're not included in the trial, we're not able to explore that and really come up with the right solution that's equitable for all the patients that we're trying to serve. So that's just one example I give on how a PBRG helped drive legislation and policy with the FDA to ensure that persons with disabilities are now more inclusive in the process of clinical trials.
Marisol?
Back a couple of years back, I want to say that one of the things that resonated with me in terms of what some of the important things that were coming out of the EBRGs was the fact that the Women's Leadership Alliance was able to advocate and have stations throughout our lines of business for working mothers to be able to have lactation rooms available to them, because it was very difficult for them to be able to go into an office and do it. It was not conducive, or just have the privacy needed in the field to be able to do so. So that was a big win for the Women's Leadership Alliance. One of our employee resource groups out in Long Island helped come up with the solution to help some, and forgive me, I don't remember the exact details, but there were some birds that were being endangered with them nesting in our towers. So they came up with the solution on how to help those birds and relocate them to another area to protect them. So it's those type of things that are coming out of employee business resource groups. And what I love about our employee business resource groups is that we all work together to come up with solutions that are impacting the business, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just really started to drive the business part of it. As part of Adelante, one of my biggest passions is in ensuring that we're bringing quality talent into the company that may be overlooked. So as PSEG ambassadors, we go in as Adelante, and we partner with community colleges to do STEM panels and have navigating careers in STEM for Passaic County Community College. We do role models for middle school students. We go in and we tell our stories, and then we have them come in for an Imagine Day so that they can see that there is someone that may look like them or come from their background that is a success story. And that's building up our future generations, mm-hmm. right? And that's important for ensuring that you're going to have that pipeline of leaders coming in. Mm-hmm. And we do this in partnership with our diversity talent acquisition group.
You mentioned at the beginning, and before we go on, I just want to note that because we are one panelist short, we're happy to take questions throughout the course of this presentation. So you guys can all be our third panelist. But you mentioned at the beginning of your, when you were introducing yourself, that when you first came to PSEG, you looked to these ERGs as a place where you could sort of find your footing as a Puerto Rican woman there. You didn't see a lot of other Puerto Ricans there, and that was a way for you to sort of get acclimated. When you talk about wanting to improve the pipeline and bring quality talent into the company, more diverse talent into the company, is there a focus on retention? And do these employee resource groups help with that as well?
So we have what we call strategic pillars that are given to us from the Office of DEI, right? And these strategic pillars come out of our employee engagement survey and whatever the results are from that. And coming into my role, I had asked the question. I said, how many Hispanics do we have in the company? How many are in managerial roles? How many are in director roles? How many are women? How many are still here over the last year? So in asking those questions, we are able to come up with ways in which we can try to work on retention. Retention comes from creating a psychologically safe environment where employees feel seen, valued, respected, and that they belong. If you don't create that type of culture, an employee will not stay there. It's not always about the manager. You can have the best manager in the world and still feel like you don't belong there. So you have to create that authentic, organic environment for it to happen. It's not a forced thing. It's not something you check off the box. You have to put it in action. And for me, one of the things that I also look to in a company is I see what you're doing for the employees, but what are you doing for the communities that you serve? And if you're not putting that action and that money and those resources in those communities you serve, then there's an imbalance.
I want to get back to money in a minute, but you mentioned, Marisol, the need to create an authentic, organic environment. Megan, we know that in a lot of these organizations, leadership at the top of these organizations is not often not significantly composed of people from underrepresented groups. When that's true, how does an organization create an authentic, organic environment where people from underrepresented groups can feel like they belong and are included and can succeed?
You want my PC answer, or you want you want the real now? I think they can go on a journey to realize that. I think it is very difficult to fully realize that if you do not have representation across your leadership. It just, I think that is a piece that is necessary to get to the most optimal place of inclusion and all the cultural elements that Marisol was talking about. Because if you don't have people in the seats of decision-making and power that have connectivity or lived experience, to the work that is so important that we're speaking to, it's very difficult to bridge that. But I do believe you can be on the journey there even before you have perfect representation.
Right, because if you're ever going to get there, you have to start
absolutely.
somewhere, right?
And I think accountability has to be really important. So a part of what we've done, like many companies have done the past couple of years, have made commitments and goals. That means the company is saying, we're not there yet, but we are clearly creating a pathway to get to a place that we believe is going to be more inclusive and more equitable for all of the people that we engage and kind of serve community, our patients, consumers, whatever kind of your business focus is. So for us, that's come with, for example, workforce representation goals. So we set very clear goals in 2020 that in 5 years, we want to have 50% what we call gender parity representation at our VP and above levels. So that means we should have just as many men and women in VP plus roles across the organization globally. We set very specific goals for our Black and Hispanic talent. And we also have what we call aspirational goals that are more contextualized given what a certain unit, region, business function, the gaps they may have. So like when I worked in marketing, gender parity was not an issue. Most of us were actually women, right? We actually needed to hire more men, so that wouldn't be really the goal that we set for that function or context. If I look at our, IT organization, there's specific, kind of goals. Our IT organization is a great example where we have phenomenal Asian talent, but not at the leadership level. Right? So the goal there is not just simply representation, but it is opportunities to elevate the diverse representation that you have within that particular part of the company. So I think those goals, even while we may not have, and we actually have pretty healthy on our board representation, and we are at gender parity for our leadership team, our LT level, but those goals really drive the accountability throughout the organization to ensure that we are charting a path forward. And I think that provides vision and inspiration to our colleagues in the organization to say, we're clearly working on this and we have clear path forward on how we're going to get there.
All right. Marisol?
Yeah, I agree. Goals are very important. If you don't measure it, it doesn't happen, right? So every person in our company has a People Strong goal that has DE&I in it. And DE&I is multifaceted. There's a volunteer piece. There's a supplier diversity piece, which I am proud to represent as well. And everyone has someone to contribute to the goal. And sometimes you have to have that compensable commitment in order to drive action.
Right.
And
so you say compensable commitments. So earlier you said that your employees who are involved in the ERGs are not compensated strictly for that. But could you talk about what you mean when you talk about a compensable commitment in this context?
So each EBRG has goals associated with the overall D&I structure. For example, we this year have a goal to increase EBRG participation in our bargaining unit employees by 5%. That all ties into the overall DEI percentage of the goal. So everything is very strategic, and we put it in places where we can have, the most impact. If you want to make true impact in a company, it's a grassroots effort. Your employees all of your employees, from your individual contributor all the way to your senior leadership team, they're all driving the culture of your company. So if you want to impact change, start at your grassroots level. Get your employees engaged in EBRG's local inclusion teams. Let them help you set the goals. And I think it's a more focus-driven structure. What I like about what I do for my day job is that I'm the supplier diversity manager, right? So it's my job to go out and ensure that our vendor base is representative of the communities we serve, and ensuring that they have a pipeline in the procurement space, in the sourcing. However, I also take that out to our EBRGs and all our lines of business, because you know what? Everyone in the company who has a decision to make when you're looking for a supplier should have supplier diversity at the back of your thought process, because it's all intertwined in the success of the company. So I'm constantly talking about supplier diversity, not only in my role, but on the EBRG side too, because we use vendors for our events and for stuff. So why not ensure that that message is getting across to the leaders in the EBRGs who are across the lines of business, who can take that back to make an impact on the overall business.
And is there compensation tied to any of your DEI efforts in your company?
Yes.
Okay. How does that work?
So like I said, DEI is a percentage of our overall enterprise scorecard.
Okay.
And then there's various parts of it, like we have a volunteer piece, we have supplier diversity, we have like the individual pieces of DEI that all tie into that.
Got it. So you mentioned, Megan, that George Floyd's murder in April of 2020 was a tipping point. And one of the things I think is interesting about that is that George Floyd is not the first African-American man who was murdered by police, right? But because of the pandemic, we were all at home and happened to see
Tipping
it,
point, yeah.
right? And I think that was sort of a significant contributor to why it moved any needle, because people were kind of forced to pay attention to it in ways that they had not been in the past. But if George Floyd is the tipping point, do you see the pendulum starting to swing away from a commitment to DEI? Because there have been a number of articles talking about this recently, that companies are starting to downsize their DEI staff and reduce compensation for DEI professionals. And we see, on the education side that there's a lot of pressure on universities to reduce their focus on educational issues that are related to DEI. So have you seen any indication that the pendulum is swinging from that more significant commitment?
Yes. I think we're going to be in a little bit of that space of a bit of back and forth for some time. I think it's quite normal when you are on a change journey, when there's a lot of transformation and change that's taking place, and we kind of went after this in a really massive way. Like every company out the gate made these massive commitments. I think corporate America is $500 billion in on kind of just the dollars that were pledged to the space of DEI, kind of April 2020, kind of through that next year. And I have to say, to your point, the tipping point of George Floyd's murder was a culmination of many grassroots, right? Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, right? Like this was the culmination of dozens and hundreds of of African American Black people obviously being murdered in the streets, that really led to a global movement. I mean, you saw people in Germany
Yeah.
where there are no Black people protesting, right? Because it pierced the consciousness, right, of the global community in a way, and that was really, again, the culmination of a lot of grassroots work that had happened years prior.
So we can thank the pandemic for something.
So the pandemic, forced us to deal with it maybe, right? But it was there, to your point. But I do think these commitments that were made, I think they were very progressive and assertive and visionary, which means not everybody still understands them. So I think you have these commitments that were made at lots of companies, many times from the top, the CEO and that leadership team, driven by some grassroots, kind of, again, pressure. But you have many people in organizations still not completely sure why. What is it going to produce? Should we be seeing certain results 3 years in that we're not seeing? We all have these scorecards. How are we tracking? And I think we're going to be in that space for a bit of time. I think we're also strengthening in the space of DEI, coming from the commercial side, our ability to measure and metric the outcomes and impact of the work that we do.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fair challenge to have on the space of DEI, particularly in the private sector, where we still have to ensure that we are doing work that's driving value for our shareholders.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a part of what you have to consider in the private sector. And so I think it's about now really getting strategic and being very clear and measurable on the outcomes and impact of the work that we're doing. So that's a lot of the focus that we're having. But the last thing I'll say is the external environment is interesting right now. And I think it's going to be interesting for some time. In my industry, Pfizer, it's very public. You can Google it. They have a lawsuit on their desk, right, for a program that they launched specifically targeted towards, young students of color in STEM to increase their pipeline efforts. They are being sued for that,
Yeah.
for reverse discrimination.
Right. And that's consistent
Even
with.
saying that blows my mind.
Right.
But so these are real legal risk, regulatory risk, particularly if you're in an industry that's heavily regulated like ours. Lots of tensions that we have to work through to really make good on our commitments. And I think in a way, the commitments many companies made, I don't know if corporate America fully realized what we were signing up for. And I think that naivety wasn't a bad thing, because maybe we wouldn't have done it if we truly knew what was going to be on the other side of it. But now the external environment is not easy, and there are a lot of legal risks actually to, as a lawyer, to sustain the commitments and the goals that we set out for ourselves. So there's a back and forth tension there.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're mentioning the lawsuit against Pfizer. That's sort of consistent with, now, many of you probably know Harvard has been sued over its academic admissions program, and that case was argued.
My alma mater, UNC Chapel Hill.
Right, exactly. And that case was argued before the Supreme Court a couple of months ago, and that lawsuit is really making people, not only universities, but businesses, very skittish about many of the initiatives that they've undertaken to advance diversity in their organizations. I do think, though, that I think that one of the things that people who have analyzed that case more closely than I have concluded is that the metrics, like developing the metrics that support these initiatives, would help to justify them and defeat the kinds of lawsuits that the kinds of lawsuits that have been brought against Harvard and Pfizer and UNC. Because if an organization can show that they really don't have Asians in a particular business or in their organization at all, or they really are deficient in these areas, that will help to support what they're trying to do. We were talking earlier about the challenge of developing metrics. What do you see as some of the challenges of developing metrics that support these kinds of things? Because, businesses engage in all kinds of activities that don't directly bring dollars in the door, and they characterize them as investments. My air quotes for anybody who's not watching. They characterize them as investments. They sponsor events, and they, slap their name on a golf tournament, and they do whatever. And that's an investment, even if it doesn't bring clients in the door, even if it doesn't bring dollars directly in the door. People understand that.
Yeah.
But it seems like the metrics around diversity often become around supporting diversity and increasing diversity are often harder for organizational leadership to understand. Can you guys talk about what some of those challenges are?
So
Marisol?
I'm gonna say here, I'm not in HR and I'm not in the Office of DEI, so
Right.
I honestly don't feel comfortable speaking about the challenges of what they are. So I'm gonna defer this one to you.
Yeah, and a part of what we're doing, because our DEI strategy and vision goes well beyond HR, again, just hiring, kind of diverse representation, we are looking at metrics across the full business operation. So how does the goal that we have around supplier diversity, what is the metric and measurement should we be putting there to show that we're meeting our overall procurement and sourcing objectives and strategy? We have metrics and goals now around our clinical trials. How does locating, and we are actually physically moving some of our trial locations to increase access to the trials. Access is a huge reason why certain groups aren't properly represented in clinical trials. What does that do for our speed of development? Because the quicker we can get the right, kind of mix in population groups into the trials, that actually helps our speed of development. So that's a metric that we can actually measure from a DEI perspective. So those are the hard metrics that we're essentially integrating into the business objectives that we have. When it comes to the HR portion of DEI, for us, it's an enterprise strategy, not just HR. And by the way, many companies are taking their DEI offices out of HR. I've seen them dropped into innovation centers. They are sometimes a separate enterprise function alongside legal, IT, HR. So there's lots of different models, I think, that we're seeing emerge that are quite progressive to ensure, again, that we really unlock the full value and integration of DEI throughout the organization. But when it comes to the HR piece, we are actually working with a diverse supplier to build an inclusion index, to build something that will help us measure the impact of inclusion on the organization. What does that do to innovation? How do we tie that to our employee survey scores that we take twice a year? What does that do to the culture of belonging, which impacts your retention? It's very expensive to lose people.
Right.
It's very expensive to have people quit, and you constantly have to hire new people. So there is a dollar value that we can actually assert on retention and how much money we can save the company, right, as a metric once we build the capability to really measure inclusion. So I think some of these capabilities we don't have, and we're creating them. But I personally, and probably because I'm from the commercial side, I think it's really exciting to be able to bring this level of rigor. Like for folks that are saying, like, show me more, I'm like, bring it on.
Right.
Yes,
Right,
okay.
right.
I'd like challenge.
Right.
Because I think it's going to help the work become much more sustainable and long-term if we do have good measures, metrics, and KPIs in place for the impact and outcomes that we're driving.
Yeah, we have that challenge in law firms generally. I think mine is not unique in this way that, one of the factors that people talk about being reflecting the importance of diversity, and I think you touched on it, is that diverse teams create better solutions and ultimately better outcomes for their clients, whoever they are. And we have clients in the very traditional sense. Lawyers represent clients. And, when your problem is a legal problem and the solution is, some form of a legal solution, whether it's a transaction or it's litigation or it's, a real estate deal or whatever it is, I think sometimes it's hard to understand how a diverse team could contribute to a better solution when the solution seems to have a more or less concrete framework, right? There are rules, there are, parameters around a transaction, there are price points and whatever the elements are. But I think that one of the things that, two things. First of all, I think law firms are getting more demand from clients to make their teams more diverse, which increases our ability to sort of understand directly how it benefits the firm if our clients want more diverse teams, if our clients are measuring the diversity of the teams and asking us to report back, then there's an impetus for us to make sure that we have the diversity to support those measurements. And, I think that as we create a culture where diversity is important and people who are from underrepresented groups feel more included and feel like they belong, they bring those different perspectives to any problem-solving situation, which ultimately helps to create a stronger solution, because then the team that's thinking about the solution has thought about it from a number of different angles that might not have been considered if the team was more homogeneous. And so I think in our industry, it's more, it's less directly quantifiable.
Yeah.
But I think the quantification comes when clients are requesting it, and then we see the benefit of it, and the two things start to feed each other. You mentioned sustainability, making these things sustainable, and the metrics helping to do that. What other ways can companies make their diversity work more sustainable so that maybe we just don't have to keep justifying it? That would be a start, right? Marisol, could you talk about that?
For my supplier diversity hat on, we made a commitment in our annual ESG report in 2020 to ensure that we were going to have 30% diverse spend by 2023. And it was an aggressive goal for us, and I'm proud to say that we met that goal in 2021. So we were 2 years ahead of it. And part of ESG is also the investment you're making in your people. It's those that factor of the importance of your employees and the resources available to them that are going to allow you to continue a sustainable program, right? Our DEI work at our company is not new. It's been there. It's just gotten better. It's gotten more focused. So when you start to focus and put things in place that are gonna continue to build your workforce and really create that culture of inclusion and belonging and equity, your program will sustain itself automatically, organically.
Yeah.
And I'm very proud of that. And I'm fortunate enough that I've seen the growth since I started 9 years ago. And it's not stopping today. It's continuing. But people are watching, right? A lot of times people on the outside don't see the internal stuff that is going on, right? So they're looking at the external. So best believe, don't talk about it, be about it. If you're going to say that you're going to invest in the community, there better be that visual that you're investing in building up those communities. And I'm glad that I'm a small part of that with our supplier diversity program, because we have a great program and we partner with the chambers of commerce. We partner with those community organizations that are going to be that pipeline for our diverse suppliers. I build relationships with nonprofits. I love meeting people and organizations that are going to help me bring in those diverse suppliers, right? So if you're making that commitment to the community, it has to be a visual representation to the external community that you are not only just talking about it, but don't talk about it, be about it.
Right. You mentioned visibility too earlier when we were talking. You mentioned the point about even as the pendulum may be shifting, the visibility pendulum may not be.
Yeah, and I think it's great that the external environment is holding companies and organizations accountable, to Marisol's point, the kind of pulling receipts, not letting us off the hook, which I think is very healthy. The only thing I would add to sustainability is I think when I look at a lot of the commitments that were made that it really accelerated, again, this kind of focus and investment in DEI the past couple of years. A lot of it is money commitment, which is great and necessary, but I believe sustainability is systemic.
Yeah.
So that when the dollar commitment leaves, the system operations of whatever it is that you were trying to accelerate is sustained, right? So for us, our supplier diversity goal was to spend $1 billion with African American, Black-owned, and diverse businesses by 25. We've also met that 2 years early, so I guess all the supplier diversity folks are really doing their thing. So we met the $1 billion. That's great. We're the third pharma company to do that. We're now being included in this kind of $1 billion roundtable, which is a really powerful network of CEOs that have these really massive commitments. That's great. But now we're saying with our supplier diversity team is how do we integrate our system, like our process, our policies, what in our process is going to ensure when someone across the enterprise goes to hire a vendor that they are looking at a diverse slate of businesses in that process? Like, how are we operating to ensure that the accountability is really baked into the system? And I think that's the harder work. The easier work is kind of like the numerical targets and commitments. The harder work is to really change the way you do business systemically. And most systems are not set up for equity. That's just like across the board. Like the foundation of how it's created didn't necessarily have equity in mind. So we now have to go and interrogate those systems and ensure that we're balancing that and putting in processes and policies and procedures like anything else we do to run the business effectively, to ensure organically, and to ensure that the work doesn't leave with people. Because you need champions in organizations, absolutely, but you don't want the champion to be so synonymous with the work that when that person leaves, the work leaves.
Right.
Like, oh, that was the supplier diversity guy, he's gone. So supplier diversity stops. It's like, that's no bueno for anyone.
Agreed.
And so it has to be systemically integrated into how the company is now really operating. So even when I go on and retire early, hopefully, I don't know. But all the work that I'm leading doesn't leave with me. Like,
Right.
I don't want that to be my legacy,
Right.
that when Megan leaves, all the things that I'm a champion of leaves with me.
Right.
I want that to be,
Right.
a long tail situation in the organization well after I'm on the beach somewhere drinking a cocktail.
Let me
See,
know
and that's very important.
where you are. I'll be there with you. I'll be with you.
Yes.
No, that's very important, what Megan stated, because in addition to our goal that we stated, we did put those mechanisms in place to ensure we were meeting that, right? What can we do to ensure that we're going to continue to meet those? So we changed our contract terms and are now requiring our new prime suppliers to have a percentage of their subcontract spend be diverse. If this is our goal, this is your goal, because this is going to ensure that we continue to have a robust, diverse supplier base. We also put in place, we changed the way we rate our RFI, RFP process to ensure that a diverse slate is being included. But we also thought about what more can we do to develop suppliers, diverse suppliers that may not have the capability to do that. So
That's so important.
we
That's so
developed a supplier development program, mentoring program within our company, partnered with the line of business. In addition to that, I helped develop 2 business development programs with the African American Chamber of Commerce and the Statewide Hispanic Chamber of Commerce to get those diverse suppliers procurement ready to bid on our projects, right? And let's talk about taking advantage of opportunity. This came at a time when the state of New Jersey said, hey, if you want to be a diverse supplier, we're not going to charge you. So it was one of those, get those diverse suppliers that are not certified, that would be disqualified from even being considered to do work with us, and get them ready to bid.
Right.
Whether they bid with us or not, guess what? We help develop. We help develop these suppliers to be able to not only do work with us, but potential other utilities that we work with. And I'm all about referral. If you are one of a supplier that we help develop, but you don't have an opportunity with us, and I know one of my peer utilities does, guess what? I'm going to refer you. Because it's a win-win, right?
Right.
Either way, we're developing a supplier. It'd be great if they can work for us.
Right.
But if not, we've developed you, now find the work. Because in the essence, that's what building sustainable communities is. It's
Right.
not just about what we can do, but what can we do for them to help them develop and grow over a vast network.
Right. I think it's time for us to take questions. So, yep.
Hi, we have our first question right here. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, thank you very much for all your comments. I'm Dr. June DePonte Sarnak. I work for the Center for Family Services. And mental health is always at the forefront of everything. We've seen it in the news every single day. So part of supporting Department of Mental Health and Addiction for New Jersey and all the agencies that are funded that, we follow class standards, the culturally and linguistically appropriate service standards. There are 15 of them. New Jersey is one of only 11 states in the country that follow class standards, which we use for our sustainability as a metric to just be able to measure how agencies are doing when they're performing that. Have you seen any shift within maybe your employee resource groups or some of the leadership you have in HR to change maybe some of your benefit packages to really be more culturally looking at mental health as a portion of maybe retention and hiring practices, to include that in the overall wellness and well-being of your organizational structure?
So all right. As an employee, I can say that there is, mental health is important, right? It is important. And there is a focus on ensuring that not only do we have programming that the EBRGs have done to not only create that space to talk about it, but also the importance of it. And it's also embedded into our benefits of what we have available to us to use should we need it. So I'd say yes, there is a focus there, and there are the resources there, and there is the space for us to talk about mental health.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an active conversation, and it's kind of threefold if I think about my current and prior organization, actually. One, it's not so much of a benefit, but the cultural conversation around psychological safety. It's huge. You know, I mean, if you are working in an organization and you don't feel safe to have transparent, honest conversations, you don't feel safe to tell your manager, I need some time, right? Maybe, you know, and again, the pandemic has been rough for everybody. Then that is going to really be challenging, you know, for us to kind of make the strides we want to make as far as supporting employees with mental health. So that's a huge focus and conversation, I know, across many companies and ours. But there are benefits that I've seen just in my time in corporate America really develop over time. So I know when I actually lost my mother 2 years ago, I was offered 6 weeks of paid full-time therapy.
Oh, wow.
Right, with a very strong, you know, kind of licensed therapist to be able to go through that journey, and would have the option to continue that if needed. So that is something baked into the benefit package. The one challenge we have is awareness, because a lot of people don't know the benefits they actually have access to in the organizations they're working for. So that's something. And then the last thing I would say is we do actually have sabbatical time. And at our current company, because of the pandemic, there is a week in July that we call Quiet Week, where nobody can send an email, nobody can start a new project.
Oh.
Everybody is taking a pause, like catch your breath. And, you know, there's not a lot of questions to say. We're supposed to be working that week, but there's not a lot of questions, you know. Take the time if you need to kind of dig out, catch up on some stuff, think through strategy. Maybe have, you know, some conversations with colleagues that you want to connect on, but really, like, let's pause, like, stop all the activity, take a breath, and kind of recenter ourselves. And we do that in July, kind of midway through the year, globally, across the organization, the week of the 4th of July, actually.
Wow.
So I was very impressed when I
impressive.
came last year. And I actually started with the company last June, so Quiet Week was in July. It was like
Right.
3 weeks in.
Nice.
And I asked my manager, I'm like, did everything just start? She's like, it's Quiet Week. You do not email anybody.
ask
Yes,
me.
you can. Like, like, let people have some time. So
Wow.
those are things that I think are very progressive the past few years, just kind of trying to understand the balance of mental health.
Yeah.
I didn't put two and two together. So when we started these local inclusion teams, we had a big DEI summit in February, right? I went on vacation, come back the day of, and we were put into total lockdown, right? So I never made it back into the office. And one of the things that I focused on as part of the local inclusion team lead for procurement, I said, we need to ensure that our employees are safe mentally, like that they have an outlet. And one thing that procurement started, which has now transcended into all the other local inclusion teams, is we started these, what we call coffee breaks, right? We have them at least once a month. You're not allowed to talk about work. You show up and we just talk. And I look forward to those every single month because, and I'm the police. I'm no longer in the local inclusion team. And if anybody starts to talk about work, I'm like, I'm going to kick you out if you talk about it. But you'd be surprised how that allowed people to just disconnect and to be themselves. And a lot of times we talk about vacation because a lot of us like to travel, but it's such a great vehicle for us to just chew the fat.
Yeah, that's a great idea because it also gives people a vehicle to get to know each other outside of the work that they're doing together. It sort of forces those conversations where some people would naturally just rely on a conversation about work, right, to break the ice or whatever. Question here?
Thank you. Thanks very much for your presentation. I have a comment, suggestion, and a couple of quick questions. The comment is I wanted to pick up on the thing on this April is National Minority Health Month. I'm a retired family physician and medical educator, so my comments may be particularly relevant for those of you involved in the healthcare space. But the Office of Minority Health's culturally and linguistically appropriate service standards not only are in mental health, but the Department of Health in New Jersey and many programs make use of them. And I'm wondering to what degree NJBIA and the others may want to take a look at that and think about how they might be applied to the work you're doing, as well as are there DEIB standards that might parallel or synergize with the class standards? So that's the suggestion piece to work on that. The two questions I have, which I also wanted to ask the previous panel, was first, how do you deal with your different groups and DEI work in a multi-generational workforce where you may have as many as 5 generations all working together or not always working so well together? So the whole issue of generational diversity and generational cultural competence is something that's often not fully attended to. So I'm wondering how you're dealing with that. And then the second question is, how do you work with employees who may not just identify with one particular identity? Someone may have a disability, may identify with a particular racial or ethnic group.
Intersectional.
LGBTQ. So do you have them participate in separate groups for each of them? Or what do you do for people with mixed identities?
Okay. I'm trying to think of what was the first one.
I'm happy to go first.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm just,
So the first was the multi-generational, yes?
Oh, yes.
So one of our PBRG's climb is around multi-generation. The PBRG was started really for what's now millennial. I'm like the oldest. So my daughter called me a geriatric millennial.
oh, no.
And now she doesn't live with you anymore.
Now she doesn't. So I'm the oldest millennial. But it was started actually about a decade ago with our millennial generation, kind of right in that, early to almost mid-career, kind of aspiring to climb, through the organization of their career, and has now been expanded to really take on this conversation of multi-generation. I think a lot of the work that PBRG is doing that seems to be effective is a lot of mentorship. And it's reverse mentorship, right? Both ways, right? So it's kind of having maybe, a Gen Z, kind of, connected with the Gen Xer, and there being a two-way kind of mentoring dialogue on some of the changing dynamics of the Gen Z has very interesting perspectives. There's probably Gen Zs in here on,
I have two of
on
them.
working
I
in
know.
general. But very, very insightful, innovative, progressive, et cetera, versus, Gen X, et cetera. So there's a bit of like reverse mentoring that's happening to really think about, how do you bring the strengths of all those generations really together to continue to progress. They also are taking on ageism. Ageism is very real as far as continuing to progress in your career. And I think that is another ism that is not always as prominent as racism and, kind of some of the gender issues that we have, but very, very real as you actually progress in your career and thinking about how do you continue to really open up opportunities, right, once you get to a certain generation to continue the work that many folks are passionate about. So our Climb PBRG really takes on that work. I'm not sure if you have anything else for the generation.
So our company, when I first started, I was a people manager, and I had a wide range of generations in my team. And one of the things that our company did is for all the people managers, they actually had training for us on multi-generational workforces, which was very valuable to me because it allowed me to be able to understand how they may think, how they may respond. I am a mom to 2 Gen Z, so they will change this world, I'll tell you that. Them and Gen Alpha, don't sleep on them. But I do appreciate the fact that our company provided that because it allowed me to understand how to work more effectively with the different generations within the group. Our EBRGs are very good at collaborating and working together to address concerns that we have. And we have our EBRG President Circle. And, we talk about what are some of the things that we really need to focus on. And we will work together to work on programming to address that intersectionality.
Mm-hmm. And I think the intersectionality for us is probably going to be one of the top 3 focus areas the next 2 to 3 years. Because the one thing we are recognizing, like I mentioned, psychological safety, like 5 of our PBRGs had a psychological safety session. And we're like, we probably should have just did that together because there's things that's cutting across, right? All the different kind of communities that we all find ourselves in or come from. But as far as engagement, that really becomes quite dependent on just the colleague and employee on where you want to engage. And that is very open. So we have many employees who are part of 2, 3, 4,
I belong to
5.
12.
You belong to 12, right? PBRGs or those employee resource groups, whatever is going to really aid in your, connectivity and inclusion and belonging within the organization is kind of what we encourage people to do. I think you have to prioritize a bit of time, but I think sitting in the Office of DEI, we need to do more work on intersectionality because there are so many things that really do cut across. And also, the strength of that collective community. There's a lot of strength in the collective community, and allyship is such a huge, right? Our women's network, 20% of it are men, right? They're allies to kind of the agenda that we have for our women in the organization. And so there's a lot of kind of figuring out how much do we need to actually do separate and where are the points to really come together to really draw more impact.
Thank you so much, both of you. We are out of time, but I want to thank everybody for your attention and your questions.
Thanks so much. Another great discussion. And I just have to say, Megan, on any given day, so I'm a generational cusper. So on any given day, I'm either the oldest Gen Xer or the youngest boomer in the room. So 1964, perhaps, 64, 65, we're the cusper, exactly. So, and those of us in that, we laugh about it. It's like, who do you want to be today? You want to be a boomer or you want to be a wife, right? So it's great. And just to PSC&G, I have to say, because boots on the ground, the diversity, the vendor diversity supply chain programs that you do, you have, if not more times a year, at least once a year, you do the event. I attended one in Newark some years ago, pre-COVID, but the room was incredible. And so what she is saying is so true, because I was in the room and actually saw what went on and who was invited. And if you weren't a direct vendor of PSE&G, you were invited to come and learn how to become a vendor. And then we heard a lot about mental health, and I just want to draw everyone's attention to May 16th is our Work and Wellness, Mental Health, Mindfulness, and Meditation is TED Talker program on that. And so take advantage of that, because we've been doing, thank you RWJ Barnabas, because we've been doing a year-long program with them on mental health. And this really is a significant issue right now, and how it impacts the workforce. So another round of applause here for this panel. Thank you so much.